Welcome in everyone to today's webinar, Ensuring Heat-Related Illness Prevention Practices for Employees and ALRRA, the Ag Labor Rights and Responsibilities Act, Heat Safety Precautions Compliance. I'm Adrian Card with Colorado State University Extension. I'll be your host today. And this is a Lunch and Learn webinar series produced with CSU Extension and Colorado Fruit and Vegetable Growers Association, part of a labor series this spring. We have 3 other recordings that we've made to point out to you if you're interested in our YouTube channel, H2A and Federal Labor Policy, the ALRRA and highly seasonal peaks and overtime, and understanding the hand weeding variants. So this will be our 4th webinar in this labor series and encourage you to visit that YouTube channel and see more about them. Today's webinar will explain key measures to ensure heat safety on farm and compliance with ALRRA. CFVGA is a go-to resource for Colorado's fresh fruit and vegetable farmers. We connect growers with industry, government, academia, and consumers to strengthen and expand Colorado fresh fruit and vegetable production. Learn more at coloradoproduce.org, on the Facebook page, facebook.com CFVGA. And there's our YouTube channel as well. And you can search for that and easily find it. Bit of housekeeping. We'll use Q&A box during the webinar for those familiar with it. And we had planned to launch polls today. We're not going to have those. And as mentioned here, we'll eventually take that link from YouTube and post it to the CFVGA labor page. Our presenter today, Whitney Pennington, is the outreach lead for the High Plains Center for Agricultural Health and Safety, known as HICAS, located at Colorado State University. In her role, she promotes best practices for farm safety, particularly those identified through the center's research. Whitney's recent efforts have focused on heat illness prevention, zoonotic disease prevention, and building cultures of safety and safety leadership skills. Whitney has nearly 15 years of experience in health communications, mostly focused on risk communications and safety. And she enjoys the challenges of translating research findings into real-world programs that help people stay safe at work and at home. Whitney started her career in education and communication roles at the Washington and Maryland Poison Centers, and she earned her Master's of Public Health at Emory University in Atlanta, Georgia, which we both share as a common former higher education institute. So with that, Whitney, we'll pass over to you.
Thanks, Adrian. And welcome everybody as I get my screen share swapped. I'm going to do that right now. Thank you for being here live. If you're with us live, thank you for watching the recording. If you watch the recording later, just confirming that my screen share is good. Great.
Yes, looks good.
Awesome. So as Adrian mentioned, our agenda today, I'm going to start our first half talking about heat illness, what it is, how it's manifest, personal risk factors, and individual safety precautions. And then we'll switch halfway through thinking more about workplace heat illness prevention, and we'll do that through the lens of the heat illness prevention rules here in Colorado. Throughout, as Adrian mentioned, please use the Q&A box in the chat to ask questions live. And then if you're watching the recording, my contact information is going to be at the end. So grab that email or phone and feel free to reach out to me if you have questions later on. I always begin my presentations with bringing us on the same page about why health and safety matters, and specifically the health and safety of people in agriculture. The first reason is that all people deserve safe and healthy work. Whether you hire people or you do the work with family or mostly by yourself, everyone deserves to return home after the workday in the same condition that they arrived to work in. There's also a business case to be made, and that's that healthy people are more productive and your business runs better at its full productivity. And people being sick or injured and missing work, or you constantly having to hire and retrain people, those things prohibit you from working and your business from being its most productive. Lastly, we're learning more about how consumers care about the treatment and pay of the people who grow their food. Thanks to research done with the Colorado Department of Agriculture and the CFEGA, not CFEGA, CSU, we're understanding more and more about this. And certainly this is not people's top choice reason. Worker pay and treatment is not their top choice reason in the grocery store for picking a certain food. But it is something that about 80% of people do consider or care about in some way. Finally, I want to acknowledge that safety is everyone's responsibility. And yes, individuals are primarily responsible for their own actions. However, people in a supervisory, managerial, ownership role are all responsible for creating that safety culture or creating the environment in which individuals have the tools, the resources, and the incentives to make those safe choices. As we start discussing heat illness, I just want to maybe apologize a little bit that throughout my presentation, either on screen or coming from me, you will hear heat illness and heat-related illness, which is abbreviated as HRI. You'll hear those interchangeably. You'll see them interchangeably. They mean the same thing. Whenever you're reading more online or looking about this topic, just know that that all means the same thing. We're exposed to two different kinds of heat. We have the heat from the environment, sunlight, air temperature, etc. And then we also generate our own heat. Our bodies generate metabolic heat whenever our muscles do physical activity. These two things combined, we call heat stress, or the net load of heat that our body experiences. But our body wants to maintain its ideal internal operating temperature of like 98.6. And so we have a physiologic response. Our body takes steps to cool ourselves off. We sweat, our circulation changes, our heart rate increases, right? That's what we call heat strain, or our body's attempts to maintain its ideal temperature. When heat stress overwhelms heat strain, when our body cannot keep up with the amount of heat that we're exposed to, that's when we start to see heat-related illness take shape. And heat-related illness is actually a set of illnesses and from moderate to severe. Two of the most severe that I want to highlight for us today are heat exhaustion, which can rapidly become heat stroke. Heat stroke is a serious medical emergency that can lead to death. And as we'll discuss, there are a myriad of factors that influence and can predispose us to heat illness, but one of the main ones is dehydration or not having enough water. So what do we do if someone is experiencing heat illness? So these are examples of how we would treat someone or what we would do if someone reports symptoms or shows signs and symptoms during the workday, specifically at an ag work site. So for heat exhaustion, this is someone who has excessive sweating, nausea, cramps, and elevated heart rate a little bit. They might be a little dizzy. This person needs to stop working. They need to report to their supervisor that they're not feeling well, and then they need to go take a break in the shade. And during this break, they're going to do the things that help them cool down. Take small sips of water, take off extra layers, fan themselves, and that break is going to last until their body temperature goes back down, goes to normal, and they no longer feel sick. That's going to take at least 10 minutes, maybe even longer. So then if someone has heat stroke is a serious and urgent medical emergency. And so we just sort of need to elevate our response and act more quickly. So we always say that if someone reports these symptoms, or more likely, if a supervisor or a coworker sees someone with these symptoms, which would be hot, dry skin, they're sort of woozy, can't stand up straight, maybe they've passed out, maybe they're convulsing, they're really, really high body temperature. In that case, if you see someone doing that, just start shouting for help. Get someone's attention, and someone on the work site should know that then when someone says, hey, this person is not okay, it's the heat, that they then are alerted that it's their responsibility to call 911, and someone should be taking care of that right away. Meanwhile, the other folks out, coworkers or other people out in the field, will help the sick person get to the shade or an indoor cooled location if one is available, and then help them to cool off. So much the same tips here. We're taking off extra layers of clothing. We are fanning them. You can use a wet rag, cool rag around the neck, around the armpits. And then if the person is awake, if they're conscious and they can sit upright, they can have small sips of water. If they are unconscious, we should never pour anything down their throat or try to get them to drink anything. What then do we do to make sure this doesn't happen? Well, there are some individual strategies people can employ to prevent heat illness. One of the main ones that we know is being acclimated. So a person has a higher risk of being affected if they are not used to the heat, or in other words, if they're not acclimated. So during the hot season or after a long break from work, it takes up to 2 weeks for your body to become acclimated, and we need to be paying closer attention to our signs, our symptoms during that time frame. We also need to be well hydrated and drink enough water. Water is the source of our sweat, which keeps us cool. Water is also important for our organs to maintain normal function. We need to prevent overheating by taking breaks in the shade. Shaded or cool location breaks intervene on those two sources of heat that I talked about. We get out of a hot environment or reduce the heat in the environment by being in the shade. And then stopping work, resting, not doing physical activity stops our metabolic heat generation. It gives our muscles a chance to cool down as well. Oops, I stopped sharing my screen. Sorry about that. The final one is to rest and cool down at night. And resting and cooling down at night includes drinking extra water. It includes, if possible, resting in a cool location. We know that you sleep better when you're in a cooler location.
I see it again, Whitney.
Great, thank you. Sorry about that. So now we're going to switch from prevention to thinking about what the risk factors are and what things elevate our risk for heat illness. Obviously, the actual weather. So anything that makes it hot or feel hotter outside. That includes a high temperature. That includes high humidity, lots of direct sunlight, our Colorado special, and then a warm wind, which I refer to as like a furnace wind. So this is not a cool mountain breeze, not a cool ocean breeze, but when the wind and air temperature is warmer than your skin, and when it blows around, it feels like a furnace. Additionally, there are things about the way we work that increase our risk. Working really hard, working long hours or many hours at once, and then what we wear and the protective gear that we use. So certainly multiple layers, long sleeves, non-breathable fabrics, but also personal protective equipment or PPE. Think chemical resistant aprons, vapor resistant gloves, masks, respirators, excuse me. All of those things are intended to keep our skin safe, and so they don't allow air and other things to get to our skin, which means our sweat is trapped inside when we use PPE, and that elevates our body temperature. Now, finally, our personal risk factors. So as I mentioned earlier, being unacclimated is one of the big risk factors. Your body develops over time working in the heat some really cool adaptations. Your heart rate stays lower while you work, your sweating is more efficient, your circulation is closer to your skin. That allows for better heat transfer. Before those things can happen in your first 2 weeks working in the heat, you are at higher risk. Generally, people who are older are at higher risk, and also people who are really young. People who have chronic health conditions like diabetes or heart disease are at high risk. Our hydration status, specifically being dehydrated, elevates our risk. Use of alcohol and caffeine also elevate our risk, mostly because they're tied to our hydration status. And then there are certain over-the-counter medicines and drugs, as well as prescription drugs, that also put us at risk because they increase our heart rate or excuse me, our heart rate or our body temperature or our ability to stay hydrated. So whenever you start a new medicine, it's a great idea to talk to the prescriber, your doctor, the pharmacist, read the label to make sure there are no warnings about how that medicine interacts with working in the heat. So I'm going to take another sip of water before we switch and give anyone a minute if they have comments or questions to put those in now. Okay. So in this second half, we're going to switch over again, talking more holistically about worksite prevention of heat illness. And I just want to make the caveat that I'm not a lawyer, nor am I your lawyer. So this is not legal advice. This is education about the rule, things that I have learned from working with CDLE, or Colorado Department of Labor and Employment. They're the ones who wrote the rule and who enforce the rule. And then I've also learned some of this from working with other growers and what's worked for them and how the compliance process has gone for them. No matter what, I'm going to go through this quickly. And at 30,000 feet, so I'm basically going over the minimums, what this looks like at your specific business operation. You're going to have to think through that because everyone is going to be different based on the number of people they employ, what they grow, how the work is done, timing, crew sizes, equipment used. All of those things will influence what exactly compliance looks like for you. The heat rules are part of the Colorado Ag Labor Conditions rules, which Adrian can put in the chat what the link is for that, and we can include in the YouTube notes the landing page for those rules. They were created in 2022 and they were slightly revised this year in 2026, though the revisions are mostly to other parts of the rule and there's just some clarifications on the heat parts, which I will specify in the next few minutes. So these heat conditions rules require agricultural employers to monitor the outdoor and indoor temperature at their work sites and specifically monitor for a threshold temperature of 80 degrees. Once that threshold temperature is met, employers need to provide drinking water, provide shade, have effective communication policies in place so that people can report their signs and symptoms of heat-related illness, or supervisors can observe and report those. And then in the case of reports, they need to have what's called proper and immediate response. That means giving people breaks, and if it's a medical emergency, to initiate that emergency response plan to help someone get medical care. And then employers have to provide training annually on heat illness prevention to workers and supervisors. And then in 5 defined increased risk conditions, which I'll go over, you have to provide extra breaks to increase the frequency of breaks in those conditions. Now I'm going to dig deeper into each one of these just a bit. So for monitoring temperature, again, you're looking to monitor for the temperature to be or forecasted to be at least 80 degrees. And this is one of the things that was clarified by CDLE this year. And so what they mean by monitoring the temperature, it means as frequently as required by conditions. So this is meant to say, right, you should be actively concerned about when it's going to become 80 degrees and when it makes sense that the temperature might start being 80 degrees, that's when you need to start monitoring. It doesn't mean that in Delta County at 5 in the morning, I'm taking temperatures, right? It's probably not going to be 80 degrees first thing in the morning in Delta County, right? So do common sense as it approaches reasonable expectation for that temperature is when you should be monitoring it. You should be monitoring at the exact location where employees are working. So at the work site, not just at your office, not just at your pack house. And you can use reliable weather reports like apps that are geolocated, that use the location of the device to provide a temperature, or you could use your own device that you record yourself on site locally, such as any of these devices that I have pictured on the screen. The thing to remember is that in Colorado, you're monitoring the dry bulb temperature. There are multiple ways that we measure temperature. Dry bulb is the one that a thermometer will tell you. Most devices read off to you that dry bulb temperature as the biggest number, but some will tell you heat index, which is a mix of temperature and humidity. So just make sure whatever it is that you're using, you pay attention and you know you're using the right specific temperature. So once we meet that 80 degrees, anytime we meet that, we are providing drinking water. Employees need to have access to 32 ounces per hour per employee. That's the OSHA recommended volume of water to consume while you're working in the heat. It needs to be cool at 60 degrees or cooler. It should be sanitary, fresh, clean water, and it should be accessible or as close as practical to workers who are only on foot. So this really affects fruit and veg mostly when crews are out on a remote harvest site or planting. That water needs to be within a quarter mile of wherever they're working at any time, and then people have to have time to drink it. So remember, with this volume amount, it seems like a lot. You don't have to have a water truck following you around at all times. There is room in this rule for you to have a plan to refill water, right? Maybe it's at lunch, maybe it's every couple hours. Someone is driving out fresh water and exchanging things and making sure ice is replenished, right? There is latitude for that in this rule. Two quick examples of things that are not compliance. These are examples from California, but they apply to us too. On the left, there's no vessel with which to drink this water. There's either no vessel or employees have to share a vessel. So that is considered not sanitary. So you also need to provide cups in addition to providing water. And then on the right is an empty water jug. That's not water. There actually has to be water in there for you to be providing the water. The presence of a vessel that holds water is not in itself water. Next, you're providing shade. That can be natural or artificial. So natural is like a tree. Artificial is like a pop-up tent, a cover over a trailer, the patio on the side of the pack house. It also should be as close as practical at all times to where people are actually working, and that definition is a quarter mile. It should be away from a heat source, so away from running machinery, away from any sort of house vents that would vent out heat, furnaces. Should be ventilated or open to the air, sufficiently large to accommodate everyone comfortably, and those conditions in and around the shade need to be safe, healthy, and sanitary. So a bit more explanation on this. Again, examples that would be not compliant. On the left, you can see in front there are 3 workers there. The one on the left in white is not actually in the shade. So that umbrella is not providing sufficiently large shade, number 1. But number 2, you can see the porta potties there are about 10 yards away. And so this is one of the things that CDLE has shared in conversation with workers. One of their biggest concerns about shade is how close it is to porta potties. And so whenever possible, you need to be thinking about that. Try to figure out how to separate things so that people aren't having their lunch and taking their breaks where it smells like porta potty. And then on the right, in this case, this picture, the only shade that's available is there under that truck bed. So even if this truck wasn't in operation, it would still be considered unsafe that the only shade is under within that wheelbase of that truck. Another new piece that was clarified this year from CDLE is this thought about artificial shade and how employee transit cars, vehicles fit into this. And so What I'm sharing here is taken from the updates and the explanation of those updates that CDLE provided, which if you're watching with us live, Adrian put in the chat for us. But basically, CDLE has defined a parked car that's sitting in the sun, heating up as a heat source. Okay, if you recall from our shade rules, our shade cannot be a heat source or near a heat source. The thing about a vehicle is that it can switch status. It can become a climate controlled environment and be cooled off when the air conditioning is run and it has been cooled off. So the clarification here then is a cooled vehicle does count as shade, but the shaded break time, that start timer on a 10-minute, half an hour break, whatever, only counts once that vehicle has already been cooled. It needs to be at a cooler temperature when employees enter it in order for it to start the break timer. If you have other thoughts about that or concerns, I would highly suggest reading the updates and the interpretation on this, although the language I've taken here is from those updates, because I know this is a topic that has caused a lot of confusion and that people really were searching for clarification on. These next few I'm going to speed through because we're getting close on time. So after you provide water and shade, you need to make sure holistically that your team and your work sites have effective communication. Basically, CDLE wants to make sure that you can communicate with folks across work sites so that you can verify that they're well. And in case of an emergency, you have the ability to call out to 911 to EMS. So maybe you're calling each other, using WhatsApp, you text each other, you can physically see each other, right? All of those things count as having effective communication. Again, you have that effective communication because you want to receive reports or have people tell you and communicate to you or to supervisors that they don't feel well. And so one of the ways, or some of the ways that this can be done is you can have your supervisors actually be responsible for monitoring people, but the rule caps that at supervisors can only observe maximum 20 people. They can't be responsible for the health of more than 20 people. You could use a mandatory buddy system where workers are paired up with each other to do their work. They know they're responsible for each other, and you say, hey, you two need to look out for each other today. Maintain regular voice contact, perhaps, with your irrigators or other machine operators who are off working alone or maybe working remotely. And you have the latitude to define what other policies, systems work for your teams in terms of staying in contact with one another. Again, you're doing all of this because this helps you be prepared for if and when someone has symptoms, be they mild or severe, you can have what's called a proper and immediate response. And the proper and immediate response is defined as giving people breaks that they themselves initiate or that you initiate when they report or you see that they have signs and symptoms of heat illness. And they should be monitored during that break. They shouldn't just be left alone because heat stroke, right, can quickly become, or heat exhaustion can become heat stroke, which is a critical emergency. And finally, the other piece of that proper and immediate response is calling 911. And so kind of a new thing I'm suggesting for everyone this year is the rule says you have to have an emergency response plan, which is knowing how you're going to call 911. I would highly suggest this piece you write. Have a document that outlines whose responsibility is it to call 911, who should call if that person isn't available, what addresses are you using to give dispatch if you need someone? Does someone need to drive out and meet EMS somewhere and escort them to where you are? Right? All of those pieces that go into if you call 911, what are the steps to get that first aid out to that person? I suggest you write this because that's the way that you can prove that you have a plan. Right? If CDLE comes and they say, show us that you have water, you can show them the water. If they say, show us that you have shade, you can show them the shade. If they say, show us that you have an emergency response plan if you have to call 911. That's a little harder. So having the written document would be what you could show them. Next, we have our increased risk conditions. So these are the 5 conditions that necessitate a little more, but only in these conditions. So when it's really hot, which is defined as at least 95 degrees. When there's poor air quality, so when the Department of Public Health and Environment releases one of their geotagged or site-specific air quality advisories, so like for wildfire smoke or other particulates in the air. So when it's poor air quality and it's at least 80 degrees, that's one of the conditions. When it's at least 80 degrees and crews are working long work days of 12 hours or more. When it's at least 80 degrees and people are wearing heavy clothing like vapor barriers, PPE during pesticide application. Or when it's one of the first 4 days of work when it's 80 degrees. So that unacclimated period. Whenever any of those 5 conditions are met, we're increasing our break frequency. So we're going 10 minutes every 2 hours instead of the otherwise mandated 10 minutes every 4 hours. Additionally, you have to do the due diligence to let your crews, your teams know that it is an increased risk condition, and then remind them or notify them that, again, they have the rights to water, shade, breaks. And this isn't meant to be sort of onerous, but is good practice for safety culture. It's going to be really hot. Your morning roundup or at lunchtime when it's approaching warmer temperatures. Hey guys, remember it's going to be super duper hot this afternoon, right? We're going to take 10-minute breaks more often every 2 hours. These are mandatory. I will tell you when they are. We have water. I want you to drink water. I'm going to remind you to drink water, right? If you don't feel well, go to the shade, tell me, and take a break, right? That kind of thing, just that employee sort of pep talk, what's going on, reminding them of what best practice really is. The last thing is going to be training. You have to provide training annually to workers and supervisors. So defined training topics for workers are basics of heat illness, the risk factors, importance of drinking water, what acclimatization is, what the different types of heat illness are, and what basic first aid is and how they would report and respond. Additionally, you need to make sure that in this training, you're communicating your site-specific procedures. So not only is water important, but here's how we're going to provide you with water and how you can drink it. Not only is taking a break important, but here's how we're going to tell you when it's break, and here's where shade is, and here's how you're going to use it, right? So you need to be telling people how it'll all work at their work sites. CDLE asks that you complete this employee training by the 20th of April every year. Or if your crew is hired or you're hiring people after that date, they should be trained during their onboarding reasonably before they go out and start working in the heat. Your supervisors also have to have that same training as workers, and it can be at the same time. It can be the same training. However, they need more training if they are responsible in some way, shape, or form for implementing any of the requirements from the heat rule. If they're monitoring temperature, providing water, setting up shade, the ones calling 911, right? All of those responsibilities, they need to be trained on exactly what your expectation of them is and what their role is in that. Finally, if you didn't write it down, it didn't happen. So whenever you do any kind of training, you need to use a training log to document that training. That's how you prove you did it. So we have a template on our website, which you'll get that link in a moment, that you can download and use, or you can create your own. You just need to make sure you have the date, you have the topic and the key points, whoever was the trainer, and then have everyone who is in attendance, their signature needs to be on this form. Then take whatever resources you used for the training, if it was a script, if it was slides, if it was handouts, staple this training log to those resources and store them with your training and compliance files in your office. That way, CDLE comes, they say, show us that you did training. You can just pull that whole thing out and said, here's who was there and here's the resource that we used, so that you can check that it meets the right requirements. So how can you do that training? Well, this is where my team has come in. We have, and Adrian helped with this too, and CFAGA, make available to you a script that can be used that meets the Colorado requirements for training. Like when I say script, I mean it's a script. It says, say this, right? If you read that, if you lead a training with those prompts, that will get you compliant. It includes pictures that you can use and show. It's available in English or in Spanish. And as long as you fill in where you need to on what site specifics are, which there are places in the script where it prompts you to do that, and you hang the required poster, the Ag Labor Rights poster from CDLE, do this training, stick up that poster, document who was there, and you will be good to go. Now, we also know that that can be scary. So the last couple years, what we've been providing is a free workshop that helps you get ready to do that training. You spend 2 hours with us. We show you the training. I will train you in English, or one of our Spanish facilitators does it in Spanish. So you actually see and hear and do the script. And then we do, similar to this, we do some compliance information and talk about what does it mean to be a good trainer? How do you host good training? The idea is that you spend 2 hours with us and you leave with the resources to lead that compliant training, and you have the knowledge and the confidence that you need to do that yourself or help someone else on your team do that, so that you are leading this training internally, and adding to your capacity and your HR team. So that's my shameless plug. The QR code is there. We start these workshops tomorrow virtually, or you can attend in person. We actually already had the Palisade one. That was in Spanish. There were more than 10 crew leaders there, which is awesome. And then we've got Pueblo coming up later this month. And in May, we're actually doing a livestock focused set of workshops. Those will be in Greeley. So we hope to see you there and hope that you'll join us. So I'm going to actually pull up my contact information as I go through my closing thoughts here. If you have any questions after watching this on YouTube, please don't hesitate to reach out. But just remember, now is the time to be preparing. We're actually really warm this year, so I want to tell you it's maybe already too late, but it's not too late. Make sure you know what you're doing for water and shade. Make sure you're doing your training, right? Document all of that. Write down what you can, how you're going to do things. And talk to other people. If you have that relationship with your neighbors or colleagues, say, hey, what's working for you? Or I just can't get my guys to take a break. What is working for you? How are you able to get people to take breaks, right? Leverage the other resources in your network to gain some ideas. So that's all I have. Thank you so much for everything you do and the food that you grow, and your workers as well. And I'm here for anything that you need.
Whitney, thank you so much. That was super informative. I've seen you present this type of content many times, and I always pick up something new. This is our segment where we might splice in some Q&A. You've knocked it out of the park. There are no questions here so far. But one of the things I'm familiar with, and I think could add value if you want to try to field it today, I know you've done some preliminary work in how particular clothing's items impact heat on the body. Do you want to speak to that any today?
Yeah, so we did some conversations with fruit and vegetable workers at fruit and vegetable farms a couple summers ago, specifically talking about clothing and what motivates them to wear what we would say is the best clothing. So light colored, single layers, breathable materials are the best for reducing risk while balancing sort of sun exposure. So what we found is, in general, that employees are aware that that is best practice, but they have a harder time finding and sourcing that clothing from where they like to shop, right? They are thrifty folks. They're looking for cheap clothing, and they're looking for clothing that they can sort of wear for the year and throw away. So there's this weird tension between durability of clothing and breathability of clothing. So that's something to keep in mind as you see folks maybe who are wearing sweatshirts or things like that, they're trying to find something that's durable. But we know that those like long sleeve like fishing shirts, style shirts, especially with a hood, are something that they like and they would wear. And light colors they would wear, they just don't like white. So a light blue, a light green, um, anything that you might be able to do to help facilitate that access. Is it driving folks to a different store? Is it, I know there are some growers who do this, they buy the materials and sort of set up their own little store at their work site. And they maybe do a little bit of cost share, but like those really nice hats with the big brims and the long neck protection, folks love those. They wanna wear them. They just don't know where to get them. So if you can facilitate that access, often they will pay for it because they know it has value to them.
Great. I've seen so many field crews who will wear hoodies, and I wonder, in the balance of things, I know there's a protective aspect to having a hoodie on. Is it better to have the neck area exposed and just a wide brim hat just to radiate body heat and keep sun off the face, in the absence of a hat?
Um, I don't know that we know enough, like scientifically, what is best. Um, and there is some sort of balance, unfortunately, between um, other safety factors. So you have to take into consideration, like with a big hat, if you're working around machinery where something could get stuck on, or people are wearing heavy hoodies because they're in trees and they're in orchards and they're trying to avoid their arms getting scratched. So there usually is a trade-off. So I don't know that I would objectively say one is better than the other. It's just you kind of think of it through trade-offs and talk to people. If you see employees, this is like the number one advice I always recommend. If you see folks wearing sweatshirts and you're curious, ask them. Be curious about it. Say, hey, uh, why are you choosing to wear that? Would you wear something else? What would make you wear something else? Do you want to be more comfortable? Right? Asking those questions will give you all the information, hopefully, that you would want to learn.
That makes great sense. It goes with the theme of the presentation of the communication is critical to assisting
Yes.
people, training them, ask some of these personal preferences. And I think as employers, and even as extension professionals like ourselves, I think we can always learn more with more feedback from employees they're front line on this, so they
Yeah.
know what works and why. So yeah. Whitney, thank you so much for joining us today. The recording is going to be posted first to CFPGA's YouTube channel, which is on screen now, and then over to the website. Always a pleasure to work with you. Wish you the best in all these upcoming trainings. And thank you so much.
Thank you all.